Elam, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really excited.
I've been excited about this one for a little while. To give you all a little bit of a backstory, and most of you have probably heard this if you've paid attention to the podcast, but I entered the commercial real estate world a little over 5 years ago. And when I tell people that, I generally get two responses once they hear that I'm in commercial real estate. I'm in Nashville. The first one is, "Oh, that's interesting." Basically, I don't want to hear anymore. And then the second one is, "Do you know Elam?" Which I've always thought was very interesting. Full disclosure, the first person that asked me that was her husband, Spencer, because I've known him for a couple of years. But I've gotten it, a couple dozen of times since, and we didn't know each other. We just met a month or two ago, maybe. But I'm excited to have you on to get to know you a little bit more and just kind of hear your origin story, if you will.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah, no, I was saying before I hopped on here, there's the two things that I love talking about the most are Nashville real estate, and maybe even more is just like the entrepreneurial journey and, the hills and valleys, I guess, that come along with that. So really excited to be here on this podcast.
Yeah, so let's maybe start out with, that origin story, like we do a lot of these episodes, just because I think it's important for context, to give the listeners an idea of, who they're listening to. And let's start at, why real estate, first of all, and then second, why OJAS Partners?
Totally. Yeah, happy to chat about both. So definitely did not have a traditional background getting into real estate, which I feel like given how entrepreneurial real estate is relatively common. But growing up, I just never saw myself in really doing anything in business. I think the subjects in school that I excelled in more were the histories and the English of the world. And so didn't see that correlating to business. Like, if I had been a calculus whiz or something. And I don't really think like mentors and my parents pushed me in the direction of business. But once I had a lot of internships in college and a lot of different experiences and a few jobs right out of college that were in the nonprofit and government world, which is the direction that I thought I would go because I do have just a heart for a lot of different causes. And so, but my common thread amongst all those is just a bureaucracy. I was like, I'm not going to be able, I'm someone that is very self-motivated and just felt like I was not going to be able to be in control of my destiny if that was the direction that I, chose to go for my career. So after I'd had two jobs out of school, one of them was a fellowship working for the president of the university at the college that I went to in California. And then I was teaching for a short stint as well. I really just came to the conclusion that I need to do something in for-profit, which is obviously very broad. And I was back in Nashville at that point. I grew up here and was here my whole life and have been since I was 22, but I went to college on the West Coast. And so really was trying to think practically about it. And there were three industries that I thought that I could go into and have a lot of different options and have upward trajectory if I was planning to be here in Nashville long term. And those were healthcare, real estate, and entertainment. Entertainment was not very interesting to me because I feel like you really have to love that game. And I just have never been someone that was really into pop culture. So quickly checked that one off. Healthcare and real estate were the two that I had some interviews in. And I quickly just felt like real estate in terms of the informational interviews, even that I was having, would be more interesting out of the two. So took a job, super entry level, and really just used the time in that job. I was a commercial property manager for a local developer that had about 10 commercial buildings that I oversaw, and just very much kind of trial by fire. They just threw me in, and it was a really great opportunity to read a ton of leases and just get a lot of different experiences early on in my career with both office and retail amongst, Class C to Class A buildings. And really was just an opportunity for me to meet a ton of people that I was just there for a year and figure out the direction that I wanted to go. I've always been someone that I love to work. And so work-life integration was certainly my goal versus work-life balance, I guess. So I always saw work being something that I was passionate about. And I'd always rather work 80 hours a week and love what I do versus work 40 and feel like I'm punching the clock. And so um, quickly realized that there was not only a hole in Nashville for retail, real estate, and the urban core, but it was also what I was really passionate about. And anytime that I wasn't working, I was researching restaurants and wanting to travel and walk cities. And it was like, this is kind of the confluence of all of my passions outside of work. And to the idea that I could monetize this. Granted, coming in, it's commission only. So there was certainly risk associated with that. But I was like, I'm such a junkie for all of this stuff already. And I can do it in a bit more of a practical way where I'm learning about the largest asset class in the world at the same time. And so all of it sounds a lot more calculated and strategic when I say it now. But at the time, I think it was just a lot more that it felt right. And so, yeah, just, I guess, kind of took a bet on myself and decided to jump headfirst into the brokerage world, mostly because it was, relatively low barrier to entry. I think it's high barrier to success, but pretty much if you have a heartbeat, you can get your commercial real estate, or your real estate license is the same for commercial and residential. And so I just went around and talked to various firms in town and ended up going to work for a company that they were like, we're not going to really be able to support you. We don't do what you want to do exactly. But we have enough crossover. They were doing more like big box suburban developments and tenant rep deals, more like budget type stuff, whereas I wanted to be more focused on the urban core because that's what I lived and knew and felt like I could be. Since I was a customer, I felt like I had more of a unique point of view there. So really just started hitting the pavement and worked 80 hours a week, just calling and networking. And I would go to New York and just run around Soho and like take photos of all the storefronts of the tenants that I wanted to call. And a lot of it at the time, if you looked at it in, a short time period, really would have looked like fruitless energy to a lot of people. But a lot of it in Nashville is just being right place and right time, because after the pandemic hit and so many people moved here, so many of the brands and the contacts that I had made early on, which, a lot of it was just really fun to me at the time. And yeah, I guess had some gut feeling that it would pay off eventually, but I've just always, you can't have too big of a network. You can't meet too many people. And I would rather be doing that than just about anything else, because I love just hearing stories and people's backgrounds and how they got to where they were. And like, is a part of our job, we do tenant rep. And so one of my favorite things is driving people around for a full day in Nashville, and just when the founder is there touring the real estate. And that's definitely not always the case, because a lot of the companies that we work with are too big to have the founder making the real estate decisions. But for the ones that are, and they've, taken venture money, I'm like, it's a real life how I built this in my car all day long as we drive around Nashville and look at real estate. So I think just there were so many parts of what I was doing that even though there wasn't a direct correlation to how I was making money, it felt like it was fun to me. And I was able to make enough money to make it make sense. And then it really just became a domino effect after that, especially with the pandemic. And so I guess going to starting OJAS. So I was at the firm that I started at, and in 2019, I knew that it was time to make a change. They were amazing people, and when I left, they threw me a going away party, and they were just really supportive of the book of business that I was building, but ultimately, they were in a very different point in their career. So they all were kind of 1 foot into retirement, and they weren't moving and innovating at the pace that I wanted to as someone that was, getting in their mid-20s. So I knew that in 2020 I was going to make a change, but I think I definitely, while I had one option in my head is that I would start my own thing, and I had set up the LLC and I had set up a name, I still very much had the imposter syndrome of, I've been doing this I've been a broker for 3 years. I just am to a place where I'm eligible to even get my broker's, or I had been an affiliate broker to get my broker's license, because you have to be in Tennessee, you have to be an affiliate broker for 3 years. But it feels like this is, people are going to look at me crazy for doing this, but at the same time, I have built up my own book of business. So while it's what I want to do, I think it felt like a little bit of a stretch. And then the pandemic was, the best thing that ever happened to my career, because ultimately I was having conversations with other firms that I would either go join here in Nashville or open an office for here in Nashville if they didn't yet have a presence here. And all those conversations went on pause in March of 2020. And so I was, still sort of hem-hawing of, okay, do I do my own thing? Do I not? But a lot of time in the house, especially with my husband hearing me talk about it, he, was finally just like, you just need to do this. Like, what do you have to lose? It's not that big of an investment. You can do it super scrappy. And I was already operating in a pretty scrappy way at the other firm, because a lot of the services that they offered weren't necessarily ones that were serving my client base. So I was creating my own flyers and like doing my own commission sheets. And there were just so many things that I was already doing, sort of running a little siloed business within a business, that it didn't feel like this crazy leap. It was certainly a lot of work, and I learned a lot along the way, but that was also it was like, building a whole new tool set of just launching a business and all the things that come with that. So it really, it's kind of, that's what spurred it. It took me a little bit of time to be able to go sit for my test because of the pandemic. You were at that point, you couldn't take it online, or you couldn't take it at home. And so you had to go sit in person, and they would just kept canceling them because of, the pandemic outbreaks. And finally was able to go sit for it in June and launched in July of 2020.
Man, what a time too. I mean, I think a lot of people, when they talk about their entrepreneurial experience, it can seem kind of like you said, like there was a lot more strategy than maybe what it seemed like at the time, right? Because I think it's like Steve Jobs that has the famous quote, "You can only connect the dots looking backwards." But at the time, you're just trying to stay busy and take the next step, right? And so not only were you doing that, but you were faced with a pandemic, which, yeah, looking back now, you can say maybe it was the best thing for you, but at the time, I'm sure it didn't feel like that. So you're dealing with the risk of starting your own thing, and then you're hit with the pandemic. What were your feelings like during that time of like, okay, hey, I'm just going to jump out and I'm going to do this thing. Obviously, I have the support of my husband who's telling me to do it, and maybe it, the investment doesn't seem that high, but like it's still a risk, right? From either a career setback or whatever. Like, what was going through your head during that time?
Yeah, for sure. I think I've just always been someone that, like, when I definitely trust my gut, and I've always pursued what I loved and what felt authentic to me, as opposed, and if I get caught in the middle of something that doesn't feel authentic to me, then I'm probably not going to last in it very long. But I will charge harder than anyone else if it's something that I'm passionate about. So yeah, and I think my baseline, just because I didn't ever really see myself getting into real estate, or I didn't have exposure to it, so I didn't even see myself in business early on, was, when I got started out, I thought for the foreseeable future I was going to be making a teacher's salary. And I was very fortunate, even in the first 3 years of my brokerage career, to do well and work really hard and make an income that was a lot higher than I would have ever expected. And it wasn't because I was focused on the income, but it was just because I was focused on, benchmarks and making relationships and progressing forward. And so to me, I was like, I've already made a lot more than I ever thought that I would make I think I was 26 when I launched OJAS than I thought I would when I graduated college and was going into teaching. So, if I guess I didn't really see it like it would be a setback if I failed because the worst thing that could happen is I went and got another job in brokerage or something else in real estate with the salary. And I had already sort of exceeded my financial expectations for myself because they were honestly pretty low and based on what a teacher's salary is. So yeah, I don't know. I think I was able to pursue it. Yes, I had imposter syndrome getting started out, but once I made that decision, I think I was able to pursue it without a lot of fear because I guess I didn't feel like I had a lot to lose.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to hit on the imposter syndrome in a minute, but before we get to that, July 2020, 26 years old, you started OJAS, so to speak, out of your garage. Where is OJAS at today?
Yeah, good question. So that's another interesting thing is that I never ever would have imagined that we are where we are today. Back in July of 2020, I didn't have these crazy growth goals. It was more, like I said, I just didn't feel like I was operating in a environment that was truly authentic to me and to my client base. And so I had to get out of that, like where I was and put myself in an environment that felt more authentic. So that was really, the genesis. And it turned out that there was, and I think another part of, just career and it kind of goes back to some of the reasons that I thought I would be in government or nonprofit jobs my, entire career, at least when I was in college, that's what I thought is I've just always had a passion for empowering others and bringing people, lifting people up with me. And so it really, and how that relates is it turned out that not only was there demand from clients for what I was doing, but there was a lot of demand from people out there that maybe never saw themselves in commercial real estate because they didn't see anyone like them in it. And when my name started to get out there and people saw what we were doing, I think they were like, oh, a young female can be doing this. And a lot of young females would have just probably never even gotten into the industry because they would have seen, everyone that they could be working around historically, at least in Nashville. And I mean, I would say generally nationally as well. Obviously there's exceptions, but as, a guy in his 50s that had been doing it for 20 years and it would take them forever to climb the ladder and they may not have their values met in their workplace. And so as I started to meet more people and I would just have friends in the industry that would introduce me to people that maybe it was guys and girls, but like my first hire was our first broker hire was a good friend of mine, Rebecca Ozal's, now Rebecca Goss, and she was dating a guy at the time who was just getting out of a 10-year music career. He had been traveling musician and he was looking to get into real estate. He had just gotten his license. And so she was like, would you talk to my boyfriend, Nick? He's interested in getting into real estate. And, he knows some people in residential and Rebecca works for a commercial contractor here in town as their VP of growth. And she was like, but I really want him to consider commercial. And so I talked to Nick and ended up hiring him. And I guess I was just more willing if people had the right soft skills. I was willing to take a chance on them because I didn't see myself as I don't know, I guess I had done it without a lot of guidance and experience. So I figured, if people had it's not rocket science what we're doing, if they had the right passions and they have the right work ethic, even if they had been doing something completely different before, I, wanted to take a chance on them. Because another thing is I just like, I have to be working with people, or the people I'm working with day in and day out have to be people that I really respect and trust. And that's so important to me. And I figure the rest of it, they can, I could teach them. So, that is, I think, sort of how we've grown is that I've really thought outside the box. And we certainly now have more inbound, talent inquiries of people that do have experience and background. But at the beginning, it was really just hiring people that seemed to have the right soft skills and or a background or experience that could parlay into what we do, since it is multifaceted, and it can be just as important to have an understanding and awareness of brands as it can be to understand the real estate deal process, because both are really important. So today we are at 19 people, and we have a small team in Atlanta. So we got licensed there in 2021. That was an inquiry from an experienced broker who had been at a couple of the larger firms for the last 10 years. And she saw what we were doing in Nashville and just felt like it resonated with the type of clients that she serviced. And she didn't feel like there was a firm in Atlanta that really embodied that. And so, I think one thing about how the company has grown is it's just been super opportunistic. And I am not one to really create like a 5-year plan or prescribe what needs to happen, because at the end of the day, the way that we need to grow, or the way that is authentic to how I go about things, is growing via people and via talent and investing in those talents. And if I try to say we're going to do, start an XYZ business line within the next year or so, what will happen is we'll try to force someone into that position that may not, it's starting with the position versus starting with the person. Whereas I like to start with the person and then figure out how to utilize their skill sets.
Yeah, so two follow-up questions from that segment there. One, you mentioned or somewhat mentioned that commercial real estate has historically been seen as like the good old boys club. And so you were able to kind of break barriers, so to speak. What did breaking barriers mean like to you is the first question. And then secondly, and unrelated to that question is, you mentioned that early on you were hiring more for the person and then, training for the position, if you will. And then you also mentioned that staying, or that now that you've seen success, that you're having more experienced inbounds in terms of employment opportunities. How do you stay true to what I would say like is your authentic success in terms of, you're hiring these folks that maybe didn't have experience and they got you to where you are. Now you're having these inbounds of experience. How do you stay true to like what got you to where you are? Two separate, unrelated questions there.
Yeah, for sure. I'll answer the second one first because I think the other one's a little more challenging, but I can definitely try to respond. So yeah, the first one, or the second question that you asked and the response to that, I would say that we still are very focused on people that are true to our values, and that is the most important part. I will meet with anyone that I'm introduced to that has experience, that doesn't have experience. I'm, very much have an open door policy, because that's the only way that I got to where I am, is by others having an open door policy with me. And I think that's, really part of paying it forward, in my opinion. But ultimately, whether someone has experience or not is a factor, but it's not the deciding factor as to if we're hiring someone. Where it comes down to is their character and will they fit in with the team. I would say about a year ago, I started integrating people on my team into our hiring decisions, because now where the company is at, we've had people that have been with us for over 3 years, and OJAS is just as much them as it is me. And I can't make decisions about our culture in a silo when I'm not the one, I'm not the defining factor and person of the culture. It's the collective, and especially the collective of the people that have been with us for several years now. And it really, I could go on and on with just like how much I'm just amazed every day at the contribution that some of our team members really make to our company culture. And I know that's such an overplayed word, but it's the tireless effort that people will go out of their way to just make someone's day, or someone's going through something and on our team. I mean, it's very much feels like a family. And obviously there's, certain professional and personal boundaries that we, need to maintain. But our group text is, which with all 19 people, is going off multiple times a day with everything from market comps to, funny real estate memes to people just, making having a little bit of a vent session, because they know that, we're all in the same boat. We're all rowing in the same direction. And then I think for the second question with breaking barriers, I think it's easy to be like, oh, mid-20s female, breaks the mold of commercial real estate. But I'd like to think that, maybe that is a small part of it, and that's allowed people to feel like I was more approachable and feel more comfortable kind of stepping in our door and coming in for an interview, or, getting into the industry when they otherwise would have felt intimidated. But I think it really is just taking more so than that. I'd like to think, even if I was, the stereotypical in terms of the stereotypical sort of gender, race, etc., of, someone leading a commercial real estate firm, that our culture would be, the same that it is, because I'm very big on commercial real estate brokerage, especially has a tendency to be really dog eat dog and competitive, and the sort of age old way that people describe it is, you can be in the same company, in the same office with someone, but people are locking up their desks because it's commission based and they don't want to share information. And it really is, driven in a lot of ways by the scarcity mindset. And I saw that coming into the industry pretty early on, and definitely experienced it in, early roles that I had. And so I knew that if I was going to work in an environment where I was part of a team, I had to be around people that had an abundance mindset, and I had to lead with that first and foremost. And so a lot of our values derive, abundance mindset is a very clear value that everyone on our team knows, but a lot of our other values derive from that. And I think that's where we've, hopefully made the most difference, is that we're, every decision that we make needs to be with other team members, needs to be made with the idea in mind that sort of this 1 + 1 = 3. And the more information that we share, the better we're all going to be. And that's a big selling point to our clients is, if you go and hire a traditional larger firm, people are going to be working very much in silos, and that's the culture. Versus with OJAS, you have all 19 of our team members, eyes and ears out in the community, and everyone on our team is benefiting from that. And so and honestly, that is, if I had to say one thing that I'm the most proud of, is that I do feel like with growing to even a team of our size at this point, that is still like very strong pillar and probably the defining pillar of our company. And I think that it makes a completely different experience, makes for a completely different experience, both working at OJAS and as a client for OJAS.
Yeah, it's a perfect answer to a difficult question. Before we move on, I do want to circle back to this whole imposter syndrome idea. So, to give the listeners some context, we're recording this the Monday after 4th of July weekend. I spent 15 hours in the car yesterday in my own mind. My wife was next to me, but she was sleeping for part of it. So, in your own mind and thinking about stuff. And I did a really good episode with a good friend of mine, Sean Casey, a couple of weeks back about imposter syndrome. But I think it's one of those things that seems incredibly personal to the person that's experiencing it, because you don't hear it discussed that much, at least in the entrepreneurial world. What was your experience like when you were getting OJAS off the ground? And then, does it still come up to this day as you've grown to 19 people and working with national brands like Vuori, or is it something that's kind of in your rear view? And if it does still come up, how do you deal with it?
Yeah, it absolutely still comes up. I think for me, the important thing is that when I look back over time, it's coming up with different situations. And so there's a lot of things that, and my team and my husband and others that are around me a lot can attest to this. There's a lot of things that I deal with today that I do without even thinking about it. It's just second nature that I would have wallowed about and felt, uncapable to and unqualified to handle for, in the past, whether that was a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And I'm still, feeling imposter syndrome every day, but I think it, continues to be with new challenges and new areas of opportunity that I'm trying to step into. And so I think, it's always something that's always been, I guess, a I don't know exactly what the statistic is, but the general idea is that women won't apply for a job unless they like hit 90% of the qualifications, whereas men will apply for a job where they've hit 50%, or I don't know if those are the exact statistics, but I've always just wanted to try to be try to like not fit that stereotype, because another part of, or another thing that really drives me is just paving a path for other women generally, and also within this industry. And so in order for me to, sort of set an example and practice what I preach, I need to be pushing myself to do things that are not comfortable. And I certainly feel lots of imposter syndrome when I'm doing that. But, while it's easy to sort of get in the negative feedback cycle of, okay, I shouldn't be feeling imposter syndrome, I think I see it as, I've come to see it as like a good sign that I'm challenging myself and I'm learning something new, and I'm learning something new that then maybe I can help the next person on my team or whoever it is, if it's someone I'm mentoring or whatnot, and they can learn from my experience, so maybe they don't have to feel as strong of an imposter syndrome as necessarily I did when they're doing something that's new for them.
Yeah, I love that you brought up the practice what you preach, because that was one of my thoughts yesterday. So my wife is 1 month into starting a marketing firm, and so I deal with it myself. She's dealing with it, and trying to give her advice. And of course, as I'm giving her advice, I'm like, well, you need to follow that as well, because we deal with it separately, but I'm giving you advice that pertains to me. So I love that you bring that up, and I think it is just really important that you guard your mind, because those intrusive thoughts do create a sort of feedback loop that it can be difficult to shake, if you will. And once you allow them in, it just becomes more and more difficult to kind of get out of that. But that's been great from the entrepreneurial side. Let's more switch to Nashville real estate. We can go with this whichever direction you want to go. But I think from the outside looking in, it seems that Nashville has experienced this intense growth, and I'm going to use the last decade, so 2014 to 2024 as an example, because I moved here for the first time in 2014, spent some time in Austin, Texas there in the middle, but I've been back now for, 7 or so years. Um, what does the Nashville growth look like, and where does, your role in that kind of pan out?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, I feel super fortunate to just have been here at the time that I was or that I am, and also to be from here, because there's certainly, benefit to that, and just coming back to a city that, well, the part of Nashville that I eat, breathe, and live today was a very different part than that I grew up in. That being said, just knowing road names and understanding that, Broadway turns into West End, turns into Harding, and all of these little things that I, was able to already know, as sort of a baseline for an understanding of even just the layout of the city.
I love that you use
Um,
that as an example, by the way, because that was so hard for me to get until like, probably more recently of that, like, hey, Broadway is West End, is Harding. It's all, one straight line. So the fact that you use that as an example is just absolutely perfect.
it's wacky. So I guess I feel very fortunate that I had that baseline of knowledge, and then that the city has, really transformed into a place that I'm excited to live, excited to call home. Growing up here, I don't think I had some sort of, pride around Nashville. I was like, maybe I'll move back there, maybe I won't. It's where my family is, but it's not necessarily somewhere that I feel like I identify with. But I think over since I came back after college and got into real estate, and started OJAS, it has become somewhere that I feel very proud. And there's certainly lots of parts of Nashville as a city, and the stereotypes that I don't identify with. But I think, is it just being this, like, sort of the, like, avant-garde southern city, or city within the South that really has leaned more into arts and culture than any other city, and in the South, and it shows by the tenants and the businesses that want to move here. You see a lot of concepts from Brooklyn that are wanting to expand, and Nashville a lot of times is the natural city for them to come to, because they see so much opportunity and they see it aligning with their qualitative goals as well. So, um, what was the exact question again? What's the
Just your experience in terms of like what role did you play in this growth that it's seen, and we can talk more from like the retail side of things, right? Like when I moved here in
yeah
2014, it was a big deal that Barry's was here, like a big deal,
yeah
right? And now no one thinks anything of it. We've got every other franchise or brand that you can think of within the fitness space. You got Viore here, which I know you're associated with. Like, what has kind of been your experience with this Nashville growth, specifically, I guess, over the last 4 years, but really over the last 10?
Yep. Yeah, for sure. So Nashville, I would say, definitely punches above its weight class in terms of the brands that will come here, because of what I was saying earlier about it being, checking a lot of, like, qualitative goals, which it's a sort of means it's like a good place to build a brand. So while we don't see we're not the first city for expansion in the South for some of these, chains that need to do 10 locations or see a path to 10 locations in order for it to make sense for them to come here, because we're not sizable like in Atlanta yet. We do see a lot of retailers that, they want to come and have exposure into the Southeast, but ultimately they're not going to do a ton of locations, or maybe they will down the way, but it's really important for them where they enter in terms of what sort of message they're sending. And so because of Nashville always being rooted in the arts and culture, I think. And then on top of that, after the pandemic, which is really when we saw a surge with a lot of these brands. So many people moving to Nashville from the coast that are very brand aware and are, very cognizant of the brands they're buying, and they're always on, the sort of cutting edge of the latest trends. These brands really, like at least on the soft goods retail side, really saw their e-commerce data skyrocketing within Nashville because their customers were moving from the coast. Whereas, this is definitely more of a generalization, but the customers from that, may not be as brand aware, but are from the coast, maybe they're moving to Atlanta or Charlotte. But the people that I think are very much prioritizing the culture and the brands, and they moved here from the Silver Lakes of the world and the Williamsburgs of the world. Like, they are choosing Nashville out of other southern cities, and I think that's where the brands are following their customers. And I always say that Nashville has, this is definitely a made up statistic, but I do think it's true. Nashville has more influencers per capita than any other city in the US. And so I just think when I travel and I look up who's, especially in secondary and tertiary cities, and, I look up the influencers and who's doing what and who's kind of making cultural waves, there just seems to be a lot less of that in other cities, which comes with its pros and cons. I do think Nashville tends to be a more of a sceney city than other cities in the Southeast, and sort of has that like Hollywood side to it, which can be great. And it's been great for our business, absolutely. From the personal side, I think sometimes more superficial sort of personalities, if you will, can come with that. But yeah, I think I guess to go back, sorry, I've kind of derailed the answer to this question, but to go back to our involvement with it, it goes back to when I was, 2017, 2018, running the streets of Soho and New York, and really just putting in the work because it was what I was passionate about and what I loved. And I felt like one way or another, maybe this will correlate to making relationships with these brands, will correlate to my career, because in a dream world, these brands would want to be in Nashville. At that time I was calling those companies and those founders and trying to pitch Nashville to them. And, a lot of them at the time looked at me kind of cross-eyed, and they're like, that would never be on our radar. And then with that effect after the pandemic, where so many, they did see their e-commerce sales starting to skyrocket in Nashville, and the tourism just continued to grow, and all of the other factors of, the one hotel opening here, and the Four Seasons selling out at crazy rates on the condos per square foot sales, and all of the other factors that have just continued to be, and Soho House opening one of their, first 10 locations in the US in Nashville. All of these things just made that sell that much easier. And when they decided it was time to come after the pandemic, and they started to hear more of this, we were their first call because we'd already established that relationship.
Yeah, I think it's crazy. Everyone talks about the Nashville growth, and I think it's just automatically assumed just the population growth. But I was looking up, how many tourists come to Nashville in an annual basis, and it's up like 4% year over year, 17 million people a year, or something crazy like that. Like, the amount of foot traffic that hits Nashville today versus 10 years ago is so crazy. I always tell people, you used to go to the airport on a Thursday afternoon, and it was like, okay, everyone's coming in for the weekend, and the airport's busy from Thursday until Sunday, and then it kind of dies down Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Now the Nashville airport is slammed 7 days a week, 12, 14 hours a day, whatever it is. It's so crazy to see the growth. And I can see your humbleness as you're talking about it. But I don't want to downplay the important role that you've had in, bringing some of these retail brands to Nashville. And it's been absolutely amazing to see and watch your success on the outside looking in. It's going to be even more fun now that I know you to watch your success. But I think we'll go ahead and end it there. And I just want to thank you for coming and sharing your story and spending time with us today.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me. And it was really it's been awesome to listen to some of your other episodes, and just, I love what you're doing. And so keep it up, and excited to continue to be a listener of the podcast.
Awesome. Thanks, Elam.
Cool. Thanks.